Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Dorothy Barnett, Executive Director of the Climate and Energy Project. We're super excited to have you with us. Before we get started, we use a simple set of rules to guide our interactions in this virtual space and beyond, and we ask for your help with them tonight. Our virtual community rules ensure we have a great discussion, and they include the platinum rule: treat others the way you want to be treated, notice the room and build awareness together, be curious, open, and respectful, call in, not out, throw sunshine, not shade, and be conscious of your intent versus your impact. Again, let me welcome you this evening. I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about the Climate and Energy Project. For those of you who don't know us, the Climate and Energy Project, sometimes referred to as CEP, is a trusted leader focusing on climate and energy solutions. Our mission is to build resilience in Kansas through equitable clean energy solutions and climate action. Our programs address clean energy, climate resilience, climate and energy policy, and civic participation. Using a collaborative approach, CEP connects people, organizations, and ideas. We present science-based facts, facilitate critical thinking and community engagement, and we co-create equitable and productive solutions with existing and new relationships. Our work drives climate adaptation and reduces risk while increasing community resilience. Our work across the state has connected us to a vast network of partners and volunteers. People like you, Kansans who want a healthier future for everyone, men and women who recognize climate change as a threat to public health, and those who want bold, comprehensive action. We all recognize the need to reduce the risk of climate disruption and safeguard the future of our state. We're so glad that you're here tonight to learn more about how you can take action on climate change. It's my pleasure to introduce you to one of our staff members, Sarah DeHart-Valtico. Sarah is a program coordinator for the Climate and Energy Project, focused on a systems-based approach to building community power through civic engagement. Recently rejoining CEP, Sarah previously managed our integrated voter engagement work and organized the Environmental Leadership Summit, providing leadership training to environmental leaders across the state. Prior to her work at CEP, Sarah worked in both the corporate and nonprofit world, forging multi-sector partnerships and working at the intersections of organic agriculture, food access, community health, and racial and environmental justice. Sarah believes that a system-based approach can help amplify the voices of those first and most impacted by climate change, and to ensure that those most affected can also affect change. Sarah?
Thanks, Dorothy. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am a program coordinator here at Climate and Energy Project, and Dorothy mentioned that I was here a couple of years ago. So I worked with some of you when I was last here, and I'm looking forward to continuing those relationships and forming new ones with some of those new to me faces joining us tonight as well. So I'm really excited to kick off our Kansas Climate Core this evening. We have a fantastic opportunity to hear from two of our partners in this work and beyond, Lindsay Behgam of the Voter Network and Nathaniel Stinnett of the Environmental Voter Project. But first, I do want to take a quick moment to thank all of you for being here and acknowledge just how important this work is. The Kansas Climate Core is the face of CEP's integrated voter engagement work, or you may hear me call it IVE. This kind of engagement is a systems-based approach to building a groundswell of power across Kansas that we hope will ask for and support, sponsor, and collectively demand a more resilient Kansas. So Kansas Climate Core facilitates a network of people just like you across the state, Kansas Climate Core leaders. And we're hoping that you all will work within your communities to increase the voter awareness and engagement on the links between health, climate resilience, and energy. So a foundational part of our integrated voter engagement work will be around increasing voter turnout. And both of our guests this evening are doing amazing work to mobilize voters across the state. So let's get started. I will say a quick bit of housekeeping. If you do have any questions that come up, please drop them in the chat. Our staff will be monitoring them and we'll address them at a couple of different points during this evening. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Lindsay Behgam currently serves as the Associate Director of the Voter Network, a nonpartisan nonprofit organization dedicated to creating a culture of informed, enthusiastic Kansas voters, especially in communities that have been routinely undermined in the political process. Prior to working at the Voter Network, Lindsay spent 4 years with the mayor's office in Kansas City, Kansas, where she oversaw staff, policy, and project management. She previously also held roles in corporate community relations and on a number of Kansas political campaigns at the local, state, and federal levels, including serving as Congressman Dennis Moore's campaign manager for his successful 2008 re-election bid. Lindsay believes that an empowered electorate creates responsive, transparent, and inclusive government, and she's particularly interested in encouraging more people to vote in local elections. So welcome, Lindsay.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having me, Climate Energy Project. I'm sorry, I'm in a coffee shop this evening, so forgive me for this background noise. I'd love to see where your guests are. If you folks want to put your cities in the chat, I'm super interested. And if anybody wants to guess where my background picture is located, I don't have a prize for you, but we'll come up with something really great. Sarah, do you have any prizes here tonight? No, she's on mute. I'll come up with a prize. It's probably lunch with Sarah.
Yeah, it could be lunch with me. I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I work for the Voter Network, like Sarah explained. I've been there since 2018. We launched also as part of this integrated voter engagement network. We're primarily funded by health foundations. You can fast forward a slide. I've cut this slide deck down to 4 slides, and I'm really impressed with myself. But I just want to show you quickly sort of what our key programs are that we've been running since about 2018. Our concern is really reaching people who aren't regularly voting. And it may surprise you to know that there's not really been infrastructure in Kansas to address non-voters for quite some time. And so this work that Climate Energy is doing is really on the front lines in this space. And I've been continually impressed with them for getting out in front of this. I come from the political campaign side where we're taught, especially on local races, that you talk to the people who vote first. But then we've created this sort of crappy loop where the people who never vote, especially in a local election, don't hear from candidates or political parties. And then it just sort of cycles on itself where they don't vote, they don't hear from anybody, they don't vote, they don't hear from anybody. So we're trying to change that through partner networks around the state. We have a website at thevoternetwork.org. We're trying to make it a nice one-stop shop for resources across the state. Right now, there's a how to vote guide there in English and Spanish, a toolkit for talking to your neighbors about voting. We also, starting in 2019, launched ksballot.org, which is an online voter guide that will work in any city in Kansas with 5,000 or more people. And one of the reasons we did that was because we started talking to these statewide networks, our partners, and trying to help our volunteers talk to their own friends about voting, but there are really very few centralized resources to do that. So we launched KS Ballot. It will be live actually a week from now for primaries in Kansas, which are on August 3rd. There are 12 counties in the state that have primary elections, and each of those races will have candidates and their profiles listed. We're trying to do this project. Ask me again in about a month if I still like this idea, but we're trying to do this project where we add 1-minute videos of every candidate running for office in about 20 of the bigger counties in the state. So it's at minimum 500 candidate videos, probably more, but we think just seeing who's on the ballot, knowing who's on the ballot, a little bit about what they care about and stand for, it will reduce at least one of the big barriers people say they have to voting in a local election. And in case you didn't know, it might be on the next slide, but I'm not quite ready to go there. 80% of registered voters in Kansas won't vote in a local election this year. We have city council races, school board races, and 80% of registered voters won't participate. I'm not even talking about folks who aren't registered to vote. I'm just talking about the ones who are. And so in my world, There's often some shaming that can go on around people who don't vote, but that's not the approach we take, because it's really a pretty big majority of folks who don't come out for these city and school board races. And so shame is not our game. Our game is talking to our friends and family and making sure we've reduced the barriers inside our own networks and within our own communities. So another way we do that is through this voter to voter project, which Climate Energy has been a really important partner on since 2018, where we ask volunteers to adopt a handful of their friends, 10 or more, and make sure you're committed to that group of people and walking them across the finish line and getting their ballots cast. You can go forward a page. We call this relational organizing. That's the fancy term for talking to your friends and family, making sure they vote. It's not a new concept. The civil rights movement was a relational organizing movement, a lot of the early labor movement, but it actually is pretty new in the electoral context, at least taking it to scale and using tech to drive the work. And so we actually went out and built our own tool we call voter to voter. So you can use the same public data that campaigns and political parties use to see which of your friends are regularly voting and which are not. So it may sound a little creepy if you didn't know that that data was publicly available, but I assure you it's the same content that candidates are using every day, and we wanted people to have it for free and be able to use it to really make their work more effective and impactful in this space. And so if your concern is turning out climate voters, then we want you to have that data to really make sure you're making an impact or track your impact over time, which I think creates a better movement, right? If you want to skip forward to my last slide, I'll just show you. So since 2018, we've recruited about 350 teams. So the Kansas Climate Corps is a team with voter to voter. We're now talking to about 25,000 voters, which you know, is kind of a drop in the hat in terms of a statewide election. But if you think about 10 volunteers, each talking to 20 friends, say in Hutchinson in a city election, that can really make a pretty big impact on some of these local races. The turnout rates among these groups of voters that we're talking to over the last 3 years has been, their turnout rates have been 20% higher than the average statewide voter. And that's young voters, older voters, people who vote all the time actually are turning out at higher rates in this project, and people who have never voted. And that's really our core audience, are the folks who have never voted or maybe vote every 4 years when there's a presidential race on the ballot, but aren't thinking about some of these really important state house, state senate, city council, school board races. That's our key. So that's sort of who we are in a nutshell. I think Sarah has one more slide to show you where kind of what the homepage looks like at voter2voter.org. I'll drop that link in the chat here in a second, so you can see. You can join this today, play around with it. You'll be able to add your friends, and it will show you some information about how often they vote. We also do a training weekly for folks who are new to this project, and we show the tool and the resources and the social media graphics and all the things we've pulled together for this project. But I'll put that link in the chat, and I just want to thank you again, Climate Energy, for the work that you've done in this space and for having me tonight.
Thanks, Lindsay. We definitely appreciate the partnership with you and the Voter Network and everything that you do to drive civic engagement here in Kansas, to continue it tonight. I will say that Lindsay is quite a busy lady and she has another obligation this evening, but we do have a couple of minutes for questions for her. Are there any questions in the chat at this moment?
I did see one in the chat about Vote 411. Yes, Vote 411 is a really awesome resource produced by the League of Women Voters. I'm in pretty close partnership with the League, and I don't feel like our tools are in competition. One of the reasons we're doing KS ballot in a local election year is so the League relies on volunteers sending out candidate surveys in about a dozen counties across the state, and then they pull that candidate information back to populate the content in their site. So actually, when you get to a candidate who's responded to a survey, you get a lot more depth in that tool. This is a ballot guide, Vote 411. You get a lot more depth on that candidate. But with KS Ballot, we can cover a lot more of the state. We can get to about 40 counties. And we're not relying on candidate surveys to come back. We use like a content aggregator on the back end. So it's actually pulling content directly from a candidate's website. So you can see at least something on each candidate. We'll link out to their like Facebook pages and stuff. So thank you, Sharon, for pointing that out. Vote 411 is a really incredible tool, and we will share it in our with our resources as well. Yes, water board races, utility boards are also on the ballot. That's important for this group of people too. So thanks for mentioning that.
I think you have to tell us if Brent Ragsdale was correct. Lewis and Clark statute that overlooks the confluence of the Kaw and the Missouri River.
That's correct. But I took that picture in KCK, not in Tonganoxie.
I think Brent's saying he's from Tonganoxie.
Oh, okay. I see it.
And he wins lunch with Sarah. Yay.
Yep, that's right.
Thanks so much,
Yeah.
Lindsay.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks, team.
Brent, I'll be in touch with you. Are there any other questions?
It does look like Bill Roush has one. Is there any
Okay, yeah.
Is there any focus on municipal electric utility and rural electric co-op boards?
Sure. I mean, from my perspective and from the work that we do, we're really trying to get the word out about every race that's on your ballot. And so just making sure people are educated that those races are there. We're not going necessarily out of our way to focus on them from the voter network side. Although we do just some like explanation videos as we get closer in social media posts around like what is a utility board, what is a co-op board. You know, I'm coming from Wyandotte County, I know pretty intimately the importance of those Board of Public Utility races. There are also some really strange elections that happen around levy districts, which speaking of the CAW, can really play a role in like whether you can hike and bike on levee trails, et cetera. So there's some really funky races at the bottom of the ballot that we're trying to get the word out about.
Couple more
Are
questions.
those candidates part of my video interview? I saw that, Bill. You know, I need to double check. Actually, I put it on my list today and I don't know yet.
And are you contacting elected officials with messages that let them know a large group of people are interested?
Sorry, there's the coffee grinder. We are contacting, I'm not sure, Brent, you mean like a large number of people are interested in getting the word out about voting?
Brent,
No, I was talking more about on particular issues. You know, I think that some of our opponents, you know, are kind of threatening to sitting officials, you know, vote this way or we'll primary somebody against you.
Mm-hmm.
I think collectively, maybe we have a voice bigger than individuals.
Yeah.
We should be leveraging.
Yeah, no, I love that. You know, our work is really pretty broad in that we have groups and teams that come from a lot of different interest areas. One thing we've been working on, we haven't quite figured out though, but we'd really like to move into, especially in 2022 around legislative races at the State House, is how to move some of our teams into more advocacy. And can we use some of these tools like this relational organizing tool to support that in the causes that our teams and groups care about? You know, really the only thread that kind of ties us, at least in my opinion, clearly are some of these laws around voter suppression that are coming through our state houses right now. And so we have done a little bit of advocacy around that. But in terms of issue-based, especially for the Climate and Energy Project, like I know Dorothy and her team are doing some really great work around the advocacy side, but not necessarily from the voter network.
And I would just say, Lindsay, as well as EVP that we're going to hear from in a few minutes, as well as CEP, are all C3 nonpartisan nonprofit organizations. And so, you know, how we work with candidates, how we work on advocacy follows those C3 rules. I think we're ready to move on. Is that right, Sarah?
Yeah. So just another thank you to Lindsay. And she does have to get to another engagement, so we do need to let her go. If any other questions arise for her, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I can follow up with her directly or connect you with her to get those questions answered. So again, Lindsay, thanks for joining us. And I know you got to head off, so have a great evening.
Bye, team.
Thank you. So Lindsay shared with us, you know, some of the impact that relational organizing has had in turning out the vote in Kansas, and the impact that it can have moving forward, especially in local elections. And our next guest has some incredible data to share around specifically getting what he calls unlikely environmental voters to the polls, and the kind of impact that this work can have here. So I'm really excited to introduce Nathaniel Stinnett. He is the founder and executive director of the Environmental Voter Project. He founded the Environmental Voter Project in 2015 after over a decade of experience as a senior advisor, consultant, and trainer for political campaigns and issue advocacy nonprofits. Hailed as a visionary by the New York Times and dubbed the voting guru by Grist magazine, Mr. Stinnett is a frequent expert speaker on cutting-edge campaign techniques and the behavioral science behind getting people to vote. He's held a variety of senior leadership and campaign manager positions on U.S. Senate, congressional, state, and mayoral campaigns, and he sits on the board of advisors for MIT's Environmental Solutions Initiative. Formerly an attorney at the international law firm of DLA Piper LLP, Mr. Stinnett holds a BA from Yale University and a JD from Boston College Law School. He lives in Boston, Massachusetts with his wife and 2 children. Welcome, Nathaniel. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Dorothy and Aaron and Beth and Rachel. I think I got everybody on the CEP team. And even though she's gone, I'm honored to be sharing this moment with Lindsay and all the great work that they're doing at the Voter Network. And thank you to all of you for taking your time to be here tonight. I think all of us are very, very aware of the enormous challenges that we face in the climate movement right now. But the only way we're going to be able to achieve great things is by taking time out of our days to come together and talk to each other and decide to take action and learn about new things. And so just thank you. Thank you for dedicating part of your evening to learn about what CEP is doing and all the great work that they're doing, as well as the Voter Network and the Environmental Voter Project. So I am going to share my screen here. Aaron or Sarah, are you seeing these slides go back and forth? Awesome, great. Because I don't want to presume to know which aspects of our work at the Environmental Voter Project is most interesting to you, what we've all decided to do is I'm going to give a pretty brief presentation to go through what the Environmental Voter Project does, why we do it, how we do it, and what some of our results are, and maybe talk a little bit about how we're going to be working with CEP. If, as I'm breezing through all of that stuff, there's something that I don't go down into sufficient depth on, please just understand it's by design. We will have a question and answer period at the end. And as I said before, I don't want to presume to know what you're going to end up being most interested in. So please submit your questions. We'll get to them at the end. And I'm just going to breeze through this so that we can have that awesome conversation at the end. So the Environmental Voter Project, as Sarah mentioned, we're a nonpartisan nonprofit, and we're laser focused on just 2 things. 1, we find environmentalists who don't vote. And then 2, we turn them into better voters. That's it. That's it. And so what that also means is we don't do a lot of the things that your typical environmental nonprofit does do. Like, we don't endorse candidates. We don't advocate for particular policies. As odd as it might sound, we don't even try to persuade people to care more about climate or the environment. I know that sounds strange. A good way to think about us is we're not even in the mind-changing or opinion-changing space. Instead, we're solely in the behavior-changing space. What we do is we identify people who don't need their minds changed. They don't need their opinions changed. These are people who care so deeply about climate or the environment that it's their #1 priority. We find those people, and then we only focus on the ones who need a behavioral intervention. They don't need their minds changed, they need their behavior changed. We focus on the climate activists and people who care about climate and the environment who don't vote. And then all we do is try to turn them into better voters. So let's jump into why we do this, how we do this, and some of the results that we can get working with awesome partner organizations and volunteers. One of the biggest reasons, if not the biggest reason, we can't consistently get progressive environmental policy in the United States, not just on the federal level, but on the state and local level, is that there simply aren't enough voters who care deeply about climate and the environment. What you're looking at right now is a poll of actual voters, so people who actually voted on public voter files in the presidential campaign. And they were asked not what their #1 priority was, but what their top 3 priorities were. And even then, even just asking everybody to give their top 3, only 14% listed climate change or some other environmental issue within their top 3. That's actually a lot higher than it has been previous to 4 or 5 years ago. And we should be happy about that. But we also shouldn't pat ourselves on the back for long, because that's not nearly enough. That's not nearly enough. And when you look at the people who only list it as their #1 priority, well, then you're down to like 3 or 4, sometimes 5% of voters. And this is a problem. It's a problem because of something that Lindsay mentioned a few minutes ago, talking about the voter network. And that is this: who you vote for is secret, but whether you vote or not is public record. It is public record. And to be honest with you, if there's only one thing you take away from tonight, aside from like CEP being awesome, let it be what I just said there. Whether you vote or not is public record. And that is such an important piece of information for people to understand, because it's quite literally the essential building block to how all campaigns are run and all policy is made. Because if you're running a campaign, let's say I'm trying to elect Dorothy governor of Kansas. The first thing we do is we open up our laptops, look at those public voter files to see who votes and who doesn't vote. And well, Dorothy, just like any campaign, has got limited time and limited money, and all we need to do is get her more votes than all the other people on a Tuesday in November. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at public voter files and we're going to say, these people aren't registered, forget them. These people are registered, but they never vote, forget them. Oh, these people are registered, but they only vote in presidential elections. Maybe if we have more money than we know what to do with, we'll talk to them. But these people over here, yeah, they're the ones we're going to talk to, because they have a public voting record of actually showing up in gubernatorial elections, the elections we want to win. This is so important to understand. Maybe campaigns will spend their last dollar, if they are just loaded with cash, or their presidential elections, on people who have a 40 or 50 or 60% likelihood of voting. But it's their last dollar. And they never dip down to the 0 or 10 or 20% likelihood voters. And so if campaigns largely target likely voters, who do you think they poll? That's right, likely voters. I know this sounds cynical, but like, politicians don't care about the priorities of people who don't vote. And again, they literally know by name and street address in public records who bothers to show up for the elections these politicians want to win and who doesn't. And so can you blame them? I mean, this is something we accept in every other aspect of our lives, right? We accept that Starbucks doesn't care about you if you don't drink coffee. They're going to market their products to coffee drinkers. Well, politicians are the same way. They only bother to market themselves to people who are going to show up and decide who the politicians are. And so this is why that previous slide I showed you is so important. When you look at voters, not non-voters, but voters, there are far too few of them who list climate change and other environmental issues as one of their top priorities. This is the problem that we're trying to address at the Environmental Voter Project. And the way that we address it is by focusing on turnout instead of persuasion, as I mentioned. We're not trying to change minds. We're not trying to change opinions. Oh my God, do we live in a moment in time where it is darn near impossible to change people's minds about climate change. It's hard, it's expensive. So we don't do that. Instead, we go for what we think is the lower hanging fruit of identifying people who care so deeply about climate change and other environmental issues that it's their #1 priority, yet they aren't voting, and then we turn them into better voters. And boy, are there a lot of them. We won't have time to go into all the data we have about all of the non-voting environmentalists, but as you'll see here, 8.1 million already registered to vote. All these people are already registered. 8.1 million of them who list climate or the environment as their #1 priority stayed at home last November in the highest turnout presidential election in modern American history. Over 12 million skipped the last midterm elections in 2018. I know this is frustrating, but we also need to recognize that it's a huge opportunity. Because as I said, changing minds is hard, changing behavior is a little bit easier. This is, in many ways, good news. We already have millions of dyed-in-the-wool super environmentalists out there who agree with us. They don't just agree with us, they actually prioritize this as super important. They're just not voting. So this is why we choose to make a behavioral intervention. We find the people who don't need their minds changed, they just need their actions and behavior changed. I'm not going to share too much data with you, but I did want to look forward and not just backwards. I'm going to get into very briefly how we identify who these non-voting environmentalists are. But before I do that, let me just give you some of these numbers. These are people who, based on previous voting histories, we think they are very, very, very unlikely to vote in the upcoming 2022 midterms. Why? Well, because they've never voted in a midterm before. We also think that they are likely to list climate or some other environmental issue as their top priority. And again, I'll get into how we can figure that out. You'll see 72,330 of them in Kansas. That's a lot. That's a lot. And not to get creepy, but we literally know who they are by name and street address. It's on public voter files. These are the people we text and call and canvass and send digital ads and direct mail to, and we're really excited to work with CEP, delivering behavioral science-informed messaging to turn these non-voters into voters. So, very quickly, how do we do that? It's essentially 3 steps. 1, identification. And again, this is a perfect example of that thing I said where I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I imagine many of you will have questions about some of the more nuanced aspects of what I'm about to say, and that's great. We'll get to it in the Q&A. The first step, identification. We build predictive models on voter files that allow us to individually identify which voters have a high likelihood of listing climate or the environment as their top priority. Very quickly, how we do this is we will poll enormous numbers of people. Thousands, 6, 7, 8,000 people per state, including Kansas. Huge, huge polls, and we'll only ask them one question. We'll say, hey, Sarah, what's your #1 most important political priority? Oh, okay, thanks, bye. Dorothy, what's your #1 priority? Aaron, what's your #1 priority? And we'll call them and we'll text them and we'll do it on web panels and all that. And we'll get all of this data and we'll figure out, oh, okay, here are all these people who tell us that climate or environmental issues are their #1 priorities. And then we work with data scientists to figure out, okay, what public data is available on voter files or in the census and things like that, that help us figure out who are these people? Who are these people who just told us that climate's their #1 priority? And can we find other people like them? And what we do is, it's a long iterative process, but we essentially build like like an insurance company building an actuarial table. We assign a score to every single person in a state voter file, telling us how likely they are from 0 to 100 to list climate as their #1 priority. And I know this sounds like a complicated, convoluted process, but this is how presidential campaigns and Senate campaigns now target people. They're not doing it by big, broad demographic groups. They're not saying go after soccer moms, go after NASCAR dads. They're saying go after Joanne Smith at 123 Main Street because we think she has a 92% likelihood of listing climate change as her top priority. So that's the first step. We identify those super environmentalists. Then we don't need data scientists to tell us which of those people are unlikely to vote. Remember what Lindsay said, remember what I said. That's public record. You could go to town hall and see which of your neighbors vote and don't vote. So then we just focus on those non-voting environmentalists, and that gets to the second step. Then we can afford to be completely agnostic with our messaging. At that point, we already know these are people who, like, if you shake them awake at night, they're going to scream climate change. We don't need to even talk about the environment with them if it doesn't work. Hell, we could talk about chocolate chip cookies at that point if it's the best way to get them to vote. And so what we do then is we run dozens of randomized control trials each year, leveraging the latest behavioral science techniques, simply figuring out which are the best messages to deliver to different subgroups of non-voting environmentalists over text or phone or canvas or digital ad or direct mail, just to get them to do one thing, and that's vote. Then the final step, habit reinforcement. What we are not at EVP is some like secret election winning organization. Like talking to bad voters is not a really efficient way to win one election, believe me. Exactly, no, we're not that. No, we're about growing the electoral power of the environmental movement over time. And the only way to do that is to never skip an election. Every election is a precious behavioral intervention opportunity, even if it has nothing to do with the environment. We mobilize voters for library trustee races, for district attorney races. Why? Because voting is not a series of one-off transactions. It's a potentially habitual behavior. And if you treat it like that, you can turn people into consistent voters. So I'm going to breeze to the end now so that we can get to the Q&A. But this is how we do this stuff. And what it looks like at the end of building these models and individually identifying these non-voting environmentalists is we can deliver this tested messaging. And we can deliver it to people like this. When I said we target these people individually, I meant it. These are the 7,730 environment first voters we've identified in Overland Park who are already registered to vote, who skipped the 2018 midterms. We have most of their cell phone numbers. We have most of their landline telephone numbers. We know where they live so we can canvass them. I think I saw at the beginning that some people here are from Lawrence. Here are the 6,371 in Lawrence. We know who these people are. We have a really high degree of certainty that they don't just care about climate and the environment. They list it as their #1 priority. And we know from public voting records that they don't vote. And we've tested the messaging that we can deliver to them by text or phone or canvas that we know gets them to vote. So I'm not going to get into the behavioral science of the types of messaging that we use, though I'm very, very happy to get into that in the Q&A. I'm just going to very quickly talk about how impactful this can be, and then I'll shut up so we can have our Q&A. As I mentioned, we'd like to work year round. We'd like to use every election as an important behavioral intervention opportunity. And that's not just because local and state elections are important, although as Lindsay mentions, they are extraordinarily important, but also because that's how you build good voting habits. You don't need to be a behavioral scientist to know that, like, talking to someone every 2 or 4 years when there's a big, sexy federal election is not a good way to change their voting behavior. It just doesn't work that way. Last year in 2020, we contacted an enormous number of people. We were in 12 states at that time, and we had great results. Very, very quickly, we submit our work to what's called randomized control trials. That's kind of like the gold standard of behavioral science experiments. And what that does is what we do is we set aside a control group of unlikely to vote environmentalists who we never talk to. And then we only talk to the remaining people in what's called our treatment group. These are the people we text and we call and we canvass and we send ads to. And then after the election, remember what I've said like a dozen times now, whether you vote or not is public record. Well, after the election, we can then compare turnout in our control group to turnout in our treatment group. And then what we can do is we can isolate what our sole impact was on turnout while controlling for all outside variables like the Biden campaign or other groups or things like that. And we know that in an election where $14 billion were spent last November, we were solely responsible for increasing turnout 1.8 percentage points in Pennsylvania over our control group, while controlling for all that other $14 billion that was spent. And if that doesn't sound like a big number, ask Donald Trump how big a deal 1.8 percentage points is. We boosted turnout 0.9 percentage points in the Georgia US Senate runoffs. This is the kind of impact that we know that we can have in specific elections, but more importantly, over the long term, when we talk to these people in primaries, generals, specials, local, state, federal elections, well, then we can start to have an enormous impact. We've only been around for 5 years. And as you can see, in the 12 states that we were in up until 2 months ago before we expanded into Kansas, we had already helped create 730,000 super voters. What do I mean by that? These were people who by definition were awful voters or we wouldn't be talking to them. And now they voted in their most recent federal, state, and local election. Now, to be clear, though, this second metric of success that we like to use, this does not have the scientific rigor of a randomized control trial. I cannot claim that we're solely responsible for creating these 730,000 super voters, but we're pretty darn responsible because there aren't other organizations mobilizing people for all these local elections. 2 months ago, we expanded into 5 additional states, and you will see the lovely state of Kansas there. We are really, really excited about Kansas. And very, very briefly, I just want to share with you some of the data about these Kansans who we've identified who are unlikely to vote. They are low propensity environmental voters in midterm elections. Obviously, it differs for presidential elections, it differs for local elections, and our target universe expands and contracts, right? There are some people who are really unlikely to vote for the August 3rd municipal primary in Lawrence, but then next year they will be likely to vote for the midterm election. Well, those people don't need a behavioral intervention from us next year. They're already likely to vote. Our whole purpose is to shove these people into that pipeline of becoming really good voters. I'm not going to repeat all the data that you see here. You can read it for yourselves. But what we're seeing in Kansas is very similar to what we see in a lot of other states. Surprise, surprise, this group is predominantly young. It is disproportionately female. And it is more likely to be people of color rather than white people. Although you'll see some of the data is so small that it's hard to read real statistical significance into it because a lot of people have uncoded race and ethnic information in the Kansas voter file. The final thing I'll say is we are probably going to be active in over 800 elections around the country this year. You'll notice that Kansas local elections, both for the primaries and the fall local elections, are among them. And in Kansas, we really are taking this year-round approach. We are going to be active wherever there is an opportunity to talk to voters. I know a gentleman asked a question earlier of Lindsay about, I forget the precise terminology, whether it was local utility board elections or PUC commission, things like that. Oftentimes, if the number of targets we have in a particular election is really, really, really small, we can't run phone banks for it. You just can't run like a predictive dial phone bank for a list of like 47 people. But we will text them. We will make door-to-door canvassing available. We always want to be able to reach these people. Always, always, always. So I will close by just saying we are thrilled to be working with CEP. Sarah and Dorothy have more information on this that I'm sure they're going to share with you throughout the coming months. One of the things that we're doing with CEP, if you go to their website at climateandenergy.org, what we do /civic participation, you can sign a pledge to vote. I am sure all the people on this call are awesome voters already, but maybe your kids aren't, maybe your neighbors aren't. If they sign this pledge to vote, we will remind them of every single election that they've got, every single one. You can also sign up to volunteer, and you will get trained to call and canvass and reach out to these unlikely to vote environmentalists whom we've already identified, and we will give you this behavioral science informed messaging that we know works. And then the final thing I'll say, just because I can't not have one of these discussions where I don't like geek out a little bit on behavioral science, how you express yourself is the most powerful tool any of us have in changing other people's behavior. You need to make it clear to your friends and your family and your neighbors and other environmentalists that voting, that being a voter is integral to who you are as an environmentalist. They need to know that. They need to know that it's not just about not using plastic bags or changing the electricity you consume or changing how you get to work. They need to understand that you vote because you are an environmentalist, and that is enormously powerful. All right, I'm sorry, I went a few minutes over, Sarah and Dorothy, but I am really excited about Q&A.
I'm not concerned at all about the fact that you went a few minutes over. I feel like I could listen to you for quite a while because you bring so much to the table, and we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for doing the excellent work, for joining us tonight, and for coming to Kansas. It's really inspiring to see the kind of impact that we can have, and the kind of impact that you have already had. There have been a couple of questions that have come through the chat. Dorothy, do you want to push those out right now?
Let's just do real quick two of them. Will CEP get recognition with these 72,000 Kansas voters so that the CEP message will be stronger? It's a good question. Bill, you should know, is on our Climate and Energy Project board, so he's asking for good reason. I'm not sure what that visibility will look like, other than you're going to learn more about the Kansas Climate Corps and how we plan to partner with EVP, but maybe you have some thoughts about that, Nathaniel.
Yeah, so for legal compliance reasons, we and CEP need to be very careful about mixing what would otherwise be a legitimate advocacy message in a voter turnout environment, because even something that is totally legally compliant, if you're not doing it within a voter turnout environment, if you do it within a voter turnout environment, all of a sudden you can get lots of people in trouble. And so when we are delivering these messages to voters, it is important to stick to the scripts that we have created. One, because we know that they work, but two, a lot of the advocacy goals about things that CEP might care about wouldn't be appropriate for voter turnout work. But as far as just getting the word out, either to voters or to communities that we are working together, boy, would we love that. And to the extent CEP wants to figure out ways that we can get the word out together, yes, we are certainly eager to make sure that that happens.
That's great. I think we're going to go ahead and go on to Sarah's presentation about the Kansas Climate Corps. And then if we have another minute or so at the end, we'll finish up with some other questions. I think Brian's question about randomized control groups is going to have a long answer. And so Nathaniel, if you want to try to put some answers in the chat while we're moving on to Sarah, that would be great as well. So Sarah, if you want to go ahead and start talking to people about the Kansas Climate Corps and how they can actually be involved in this great work that EVP is partnering with us on, I think that's a terrific place to go next.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Nathaniel, again, for being here tonight. I do want to add one quick thing to the end of that last question, and that is, you know, if if we don't as CEP get credit, that's fine. I think the end game here is long-term power building. And that is kind of a nice segue into what I want to talk about tonight. So, bringing the conversation back to the Kansas Climate Corps. CORE stands for Community Organizing for Resilience and Equity. And in this case, the Climate Corps is going to be a network of people and opportunities across the state to create the change that we wish to see. And that power building is not going to come from us at CEP or a central locational organization. It's going to come from all of you and the people that you engage, and then the people that they engage, and then so on and so forth. So just in thinking about what Lindsay and Nathaniel shared with us tonight, I'd like to ask you all to think about ways in which we can leverage that relational organizing and getting those unlikely environmental voters to cast their ballots, and how we can leverage that to drive the kind of climate resilient policies in Kansas that will eventually equitably safeguard our future. But driving voters to the polls and getting them to turn out the vote isn't really the only way that we can engage in our democracy. I mentioned that this is part of our IVE work, and it's a systems-based approach to building this community power. And you can see on the slide that it's kind of like a wheel, with the building of the community power being at the center, and then each spoke goes out to like a different strategy or a tactic. It's kind of like a lever where we can exert some pressure and see how the system responds. So in the Kansas Climate Corps, we're going to have a bunch of different ways to engage, and you can choose which areas appeal the most to you. And of course, we're going to want to see robust action in all of these areas. So sure, join every single aspect of it. That'd be awesome. But what's more important is that you bring yourself fully to the table where you choose to work and where you find the most meaning and the most inspiration. I'm going to run through these pretty quickly just in the interest of time, and I'm just going to take the top three. But basically, organizing and mobilizing the communities and getting out the vote, that's going to be our collaboration with the Environmental Voter Project and signing the Kansas Climate Corps Voter Pledge. We'll also be hosting pledge drives to encourage voter engagement in the same way. So you can sign that pledge tonight, and we'll drop that link again in the chat. And then you can also use that pledge and get your friends and family to sign the pledge as well. We'll also be using the voter to voter platform that Lindsay shared with us. And you can sign up to be a Kansas Climate Corps voter ambassador through voter to voter, and use that relational organizing tool to track that group of 10 or 20 people every step along the way of the election, from requesting an early ballot to giving them resources on how to research their own candidates. Again, we don't give messaging, we don't engage our own candidates for C3 purposes, but we'll also be able to get out the vote using the phone banking training. And we'll throw some information in the chat around a couple of trainings that are going to be on the 14th and the 15th of July, so that we can learn how EVP's phone banking platform works and some of the data behind it, and dig into that a little bit more. And those will be an hour long each, and you only need to be at one of them to join. And then once you have completed a training, you'll be able to phone bank inside of the set hours anytime you want. So it's a really great opportunity to engage on your own time. Another way that we're going to be developing is kind of pressing on these levers is by developing strong leaders. You're going to be developing your own leadership skills around climate action just by doing what you're doing. And remember, leadership doesn't have to have a specific title to it, right? It's just how you show up in your communities on the day-to-day. And so you'll be building your own leadership skills and taking the lead on climate action. But that said, you'll also have a chance to participate in the Kansas Environmental Leadership Program, where we send scholarships, or we provide scholarships to Climate Corps leaders, for example, to the Kansas Leadership Center to get high quality leadership training. And so far we've sent over 200. And then other ways in which we will get to do some of this integrated voter engagement work, we will be, by engaging with people, educating and engaging the electorate. We'll be achieving some policy impact, and we'll be holding our electeds accountable. It's kind of like, as Nathaniel shared, by driving more people that prioritize climate resilience to the polls, those candidates, their campaigns, and political organizations as a whole are going to have to start considering our priorities and incorporating them into their platform. And they will do that more and more as our power continues to build. So All in all, I hope as a Kansas Climate Corps leader, you feel empowered to engage at a variety of different levels, wherever you feel comfortable, be it with friends and family, be it with strangers, state elected officials, your local school board, by working to get out the vote, or just deepening your own leadership development. So tonight, I'm asking for a few different types of commitments. And as you saw, they can each have an impact. Ultimately, I would like to also know what tools or trainings you think would help you feel the most empowered. So if you have any ideas about that, throw those in the chat as well. But the first things first is signing up to become a Kansas Climate Corps leader. And you'll be the first to know about opportunities for individual and collective action. Signing the Kansas Climate Corps voter pledge, that chat has come out, or that's come out in the chat a couple of different times. That's going to be really important. And then also joining the Voter to Voter Kansas Climate Corps team. Working with Lindsay and on Voter to Voter, it's really fun. And as you can tell, she's pretty fun to work with. She's a riot and a hoot. And so it's a really good time to do that. And the work that she and her crew do, they provide a tremendous amount of amazing resources to help you help your people and your networks get to the polls and cast their ballots, which is great. We will send out some more information about the phone bank training, but it's in the chat. You are able to sign up for those trainings now. And at that point in time, just in the interest of time, I want to make sure that if we have any other questions that we want to answer now, or if we need to wrap up, I'm going to leave that to Dorothy, because we only have about 3 minutes left of our time.
I think Nathaniel answered the questions that were in the chat. Kay, thanks for bringing up information about the league. There are some issues with voting suppression and registered voting that are being addressed in Kansas. And so I think doing things like signing up for the to sign the climate pledge, doing things like the phone banking, that's something that certainly we hope the League of Women Voters and others will sign up to do while we're in a holding pattern to get new voters registered because of the new Kansas law that goes into effect tomorrow. So I think that is, let's see, will these new voters get to a ballot and see a bunch of names they don't know? How do we help them with that? Bill, that's a great question. As you know, Voter Network has a great set of resources on what to find that's on ballots. But also, we can point people to the league, I think, does a scorecard. Our friends at Sierra Club do a scorecard. There are climate and energy scorecards that can be done by folks who are not C3s. As nonprofits, that's not something that we're able to do. I'm super excited about being able to turn out the people who already care about the things that we care about. I'd like to give Nathan the last word, Sarah, if you don't mind, and just add my thanks to Nathan and to you for putting this together. And Nathan, what would you leave us with to think about as we go forward?
First, I would just say thank you, not only to the whole CEP crew, but to everybody who's here attending this. And I would just say, please, please be excited about this opportunity. It is actually really good news that we don't have to change the mind of hundreds of thousands of Kansans and convince them to care about these issues. No, it's almost like we found out that we have 100 other teammates. We've just never bothered to get them on the field. And this is really, really empowering. And I would just encourage you to find a way that you can get involved in all these wonderful things that Sarah and Dorothy are talking about. Because not only are local elections important in and of themselves, but boy, is this a great down payment on 2022. This is the best, most efficient moment in time to start making new voters. So we'd really love you to join us.
Thank you so much, Nathaniel. Sarah?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for joining. Just a quick wrap up. Also big thanks to KHF for their generous funding and support that makes this possible. And a video of this recording will be available on our YouTube channel, and slides will be available later. So thank you so much and have a lovely evening.
Thanks so much, everybody.